Okay, I think we're just about ready, but we'll continue letting folks in as needed. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here on what might be your lunch hour. My name is Allie, and I'm the Assistant Planner for the Extreme Heat and Community Resilience Program here at OPR. And I'm joined by my colleague Braden from OPR, who's the manager of the Extreme Heat and Community Resilience Program. As we're getting started, it would be fantastic if you could put your name and organization in the chat so we know who's represented here today. I'll be on tech support for this call, so feel free to send me a message if you have any questions or needs related to Zoom technology. And also just a heads up that we're recording the presentation today and we'll post it publicly for everyone to see. With that in mind, if you do not want to be included on the recording, feel free to turn off your camera and rename yourself so that your name isn't included. As we're gathering, please note that we have live closed captioning. To access it, you should see a bottom bar on your Zoom with the reaction and share screen icons. Go ahead and press the button that says Show Captions. I want to begin by acknowledging that the state of California exists on the occupied territory of over 110 federally recognized tribes and over 70 non-federally recognized tribes. This land has been stewarded by Indigenous people since time immemorial. We acknowledge the critical importance of these lands and waters to the Indigenous people of California today. We at the Office of Planning and Research join you all from Sacramento, California on the ancestral territory of the Southern Maidu, Bali, Miwok, Hatwen, and Nisenan tribes. We're a community that includes people with a wide range of access needs. Some of us get our access needs met by day-to-day dominant culture, while others do not. We'd like to cultivate a space that works together as a community to listen to access needs and works together towards meeting them. With this in mind, we have a couple of requests and reminders as we start the call today. Please say your name before you speak. It's okay to turn your video off and still be present. It's okay to be here and not be feeling 100%. Help people joining on the phone or people with visual impairments understand what's happening on video or chat by saying it out loud. It's okay to moderate how much you want to interact. And if you need to take a break from today's meeting, that's totally okay. If anyone has an access need that would support your participation in this call or in the group more generally, we invite you to share it via chat, either privately to me or one of the other co-hosts or to the group. All right, with those intros out of the way, I'm going to kind of run through our agenda for today. If you have been to one of our workshops in the past, I think we've had 2 previously, you might notice that our agenda looks a little bit different. Right now we're in our intro section for 1 more minute, and then we'll move into a program overview, which will be kind of an abridged version of what we've talked about the past 2 weeks. After that, we're really excited and grateful to welcome Lora Martens here today for a guest speaker presentation to give you some examples of what an extreme heat and community resilience grant project might look like. After that, we're going to do a little bit of a spotlight on implementation grants to give you more information on what implementation grants look like. And then we'll have time for Q&A. Please note that our Q&A section is a little bit shorter than it has been the past couple weeks, given that we have a lot of information to share with you all. We're hoping to get through as many questions as we can today, but we may have to take additional questions via email if we can't get to everyone. And in about an hour and a half, we'll go ahead and wrap up the session for today. Okay, let's see. With that, I'm going to provide a quick overview of our program before we move into the guest speaker presentation, just to give you a little bit of context if you're new to the group today. Okay, so the Extreme Heat and Community Resilience Program is one of 3 grant programs run through the Integrated Climate Adaptation and Resiliency Program, otherwise known as ICARP. So the 2 other grant programs are the Regional Resilience Grant Program, which just made their first round of funding recently, and the Adaptation Planning Grant Program. The Adaptation Planning Grant Program just opened on Friday for their second round of funding, so applications are open, and we highly encourage you to check it out. It's a really exciting program. It's great if you're interested in planning projects related to climate adaptation, but not specifically extreme heat. I can drop a link in the chat a little bit later on. Okay, diving into the Extreme Heat and Community Resilience Program, which is why we're here today. The vision of the Extreme Heat and Community Resilience Program is to support a statewide movement to build resilience to extreme heat through a couple of things: placemaking and placekeeping, immediate response to extreme heat and both building this long-term movement for resilience, sustainable workforce development and job creation, and finally, protecting the health of Californians who are most vulnerable to extreme heat and focusing on these vulnerable populations first. What this means in the most basic sense is we'll offer planning and implementation grants for extreme heat relief and long-term resilience to extreme heat. We did quite a bit of public engagement last year, which helped us shape our program values. I'll share more about our kind of more concrete findings from our public engagement in just a little bit. But to give you a rundown of how we're thinking about the program and how we've shaped our program, some of the values that have been at the forefront of our mind are place and belonging, enterprise and job creation, Indigenous land stewardship, co-benefits and systems thinking, inclusion and language justice, supportive technology development and innovative design, harm reduction and healing, and finally, community resilience for all hazards. So thinking about how our solutions for extreme heat can help again to address other solutions or other needs in our community, whether climate related or historical inequities. Okay, a little bit more on how we got here. In the spring of 2023, we hosted 9 listening sessions to better understand the needs of California regions and communities. Between these 9 sessions, we received over 800 registrations. We also hosted 4 additional public listening sessions in the fall related to our grant guidelines and hosted more one-on-one and intimate focus groups to get specific feedback. So from a very high level, we just wanted to share some of the things we heard during that public engagement in relation to extreme heat. These listening sessions have been really instrumental in shaping our guidelines so far, and we're excited to share with you what we learned. We could talk for hours, but just a couple of the things that have come up is that extreme heat can impact people differently depending on how they are most vulnerable. But extreme heat also has serious impacts on the mental and physical health of all Californians. The effects of extreme heat are worsened by limited access to shade, green spaces, and public resources. More specifically, this can mean the design of buildings, cities, and neighborhoods can increase the impacts of extreme heat. And limited shade, green space, and public transportation makes cities hotter and extreme heat events more dangerous. And finally, we learned that many folks have limited access to air conditioning. This means they might lack air conditioning or proper weatherization, or even if they have the technology, it's hard to pay the utility bills to run it, or power disruptions due to extreme heat events or other climate emergencies are endangering people by losing access to air conditioning, electric-powered mobility devices, and medical equipment. You can learn a whole lot more about what we learned about how extreme heat's affecting Californians in our summary of public comments, which I'll put in the chat in just a little bit. We also asked during our listening sessions how we can structure our grant program to best meet the needs of California communities. From a high level, some of the things we learned is that attendees need specific funding set aside for planning, physical infrastructure, and public services. The projects we fund should prioritize access and functional needs communities, including those whose primary language is not English. We also learned that partnership requirements can strengthen projects, but they can also be a barrier for small, rural, and underserved applicants. And finally, as I'm sure you're all aware, if you've pursued grant funding in the past, there's a strong need for a simple grant application as well as application support and technical assistance. So that's just some of the things we learned and tried to incorporate as we shaped our program. With that, I'm going to very quickly speed through a grant program overview to just give you a little bit of background on our program. If you want more detailed overview, you can check out the recordings of our previous presentations. They're not currently posted online, but we hope to get them up soon, and they have a much more detailed overview. In terms of timeline, as I mentioned before, we kicked off our program with public engagement in spring of 2023, so a little less than a year ago. In the fall, we hosted a public comment period where we received public comment letters and hosted workshops. And where we are right now is this third bubble, the application period. We opened in January, and their application will be open until April. Finally, we hope to make our awards in the summer. Okay, what this means for you all is eligible applicants include local public entities. This could be anything from a school district to a city to a regional government. Other public entities include California Native American tribes, community-based organizations. This could be 501c3s or not, public academic institutions, and coalitions of nonprofits. It's really important to note that state agencies, federal agencies, and for-profit entities are not public or eligible applicants for this grant program. Folks can be involved in a grant application in a couple different ways, and I'm excited to share very quickly what those ways are. First, on every grant application, there will be one lead applicant. This is the person that's directing the project and also the person that will be receiving all the funding and distributing it to other people on the grant program. There's also a co-applicant role, which for some grant types is highly encouraged, and we'll share a little bit more about that later. These are key participants in the grant program that have a detailed kind of work plan ahead of time and are included in the budget. There's also this contributor role, which might be new for many of us. The contributor role is similar to a co-applicant, but it allows for a little bit more flexibility for folks that are still kind of defining what they want their role to be. What this means exactly is that at the time of application, folks don't need to have defined activities set in the work plan for contributors, and they also don't need to submit a letter of support, since we know that can be a barrier for some folks. Finally, we have the supporter role. You can think of the supporter role as kind of similar to an unfunded partner, so someone who wants to be engaged in the project but doesn't require grant funding. Okay, so that is kind of our eligible applicants and how folks can be involved, but I also want to talk quickly about our funding targets. The Extreme Heat and Community Resilience Program recognizes the disproportionate impact of climate change on vulnerable communities, and we commit to an equitable distribution of funds through specific funding targets. It's really important to note that these are not the only projects we'll fund. However, the funding target communities will be prioritized both through the scoring criteria and through prioritization for application technical assistance. Specifically, the funding targets prioritize support for California Native American tribes and disadvantaged communities, which we call DACs. The reason for this is their increased vulnerability to climate risks with limited resources for coping, adapting, and recovering. We also recognize that these groups face unique challenges and play a crucial role in enhancing the state's climate adaptation and extreme heat resiliency potential. Our guidelines contain more specific information on how an applicant can determine if they're eligible for a funding target, but we'll also offer application support to help you assist whether you're eligible. But again, you don't need to be one of these funding targets or meet the requirements for one of these funding targets to apply. It's simply an advantage in the scoring criteria and priority for technical assistance. Okay, I know we might be running low on time, so I'll try to go a little bit quicker. As an overview, we plan to offer 4 grant types. The small planning grant ranges from $100,000 to $250,000 per award, and there's $3 million set aside for small planning grants. On the other side of things, we have large planning grants, which range from $300,000 to $750,000 per award, and there's $5 million total set aside for large planning grants. On the implementation side, there's small implementation grants, which range from $100,000 to $450,000 per award, and there's $3 million set aside for small implementation grants. And finally, we have large implementation grants, which range from $500,000 to $4 million per award, with $9 million total set aside for large implementation grants. I'm going to quickly talk through small and large planning grants, but we're going to spend the bulk of today's session focusing on implementation grants. Our small planning grants can focus on things like capacity development, pre-planning activities, and small-scale planning and project development. And folks can either have a co-applicant on their application or just include partnership development as one of their grant activities. On the other side of things, large planning grants are meant to build community-wide programs that can transform how communities address extreme heat. Applicants for large planning grants should apply with one co-applicant that meets the relevant co-applicant criteria. We'll explain what that means a little later on. Or if this is not possible, they can submit a justification about how they'll engage with communities and conduct partnership development. Large planning grants can include comprehensive local heat action plans, amending or aligning existing planning documents to include extreme heat, and conducting studies related to extreme heat. Just to give you a preview before we hop into it, implementation grants, again, we have small and large implementation grants, and we can fund things like public awareness, community services and response, built environment solutions for increased resilience, and nature-based solutions. Okay, I'll pause there. That is a really quick speed through of our program. I acknowledge that we went quite fast. Again, you can review one of our recordings to get the full understanding of our overview, but I want to leave time for our guest speaker. And Braden, I'll pass it to you to introduce Lora.
Thank you so much, Allie. Really appreciate it. One of the things that we've definitely heard from a lot of our potential grantees and folks that have been engaging with us for the last year in the creation of this program is a desire to learn what's going on around the country, how colleagues are tackling extreme heat in other places, so that we can bring those ideas and approaches into our thinking about how we do this implementation in California. And for those of you that don't know, I came to the state of California previously, having been at a local municipality in Arizona. And while there, in several different capacities, had the privilege of getting to know and work with Lora Martens, who's now with the city of Phoenix in the brand relatively new Office of Heat Response and Mitigation. It's one of only 3 heat offices in the country, in addition to Los Angeles and Miami. And they've done really cutting edge work to help figure out what local governments can do to help both respond to the immediate needs of a community in terms of immediate heat relief, as well as how to transform the city for long-term heat mitigation and resilience to extreme heat efforts. And so we're going to actually be hearing from the city of Phoenix a few times over the course of the next 6 weeks. And we have a variety of cities and organizations with national best practices that will be presenting to us every week. And we were lucky that Lora was available today to talk a little bit about her office, the program that she started, and then some of the work that she's doing. We'll allow her to talk through some of those things, and then have an opportunity for some questions and answers and a little bit of dialogue with one of the top practitioners of urban heat resilience in the country today. So really, Lora, thanks so much for being here today. And thanks for being willing to share some of what you've been up to.
Thank you. So I think that's a great introduction. My name is Lora Martens. As it showed on there, I'm the Urban Tree Program Manager in the city of Phoenix in our Office of Heat Response and Mitigation. So the office is tasked with 2 programs. One is response, which is kind of the short-term emergency summer response to heat here in Phoenix, and then the long-term mitigation strategies. And so our office is about 3 years old. As it was a new office, so it was created 3 years ago. They hired the director and then they hired kind of me and the other program manager at the same time. My other program manager does built environment work, and then my job is to strategize about urban tree planting for the whole city, but also we have our own programmatic work too. I also want to let you guys know that I am from Davis, California. I went to graduate school in Arizona, but I went my undergrad at UC Santa Barbara. I lived in the Bay Area for a long time. So I have bounced back and forth between California and Arizona for quite some time now, but I've been here for 6 years, but in this role for about 2. And I did not come from government. So I'm a landscape architect by training. I worked in private practice until I took this job. I was not a government person. So I definitely had a lot of sort of growing pains in this job, kind of transitioning from the role of private practice into government, but it has been, so fulfilling. Like, just to give you guys a little, so for just tree work, our council allocated $4.5 million of ARPA, the COVID relief money for tree planting. For the city of Phoenix, we received $10 million in an Inflation Reduction Act grant for tree planting here, and we just recently passed a bond in Phoenix, where I think we're managing another 6 million. I like literally can't even keep track of how much money there is. So I definitely went from managing projects with much smaller numbers to managing this. And one of my kind of pieces of advice is, because in our community, the numbers that were in the past that were for this kind of work were frankly really small. I mean, the city of Phoenix's entire budget for tree planting and maintenance is about a little over $1 million. And the nonprofits and NGOs were working with much smaller numbers than that. So these kind of like what I really would encourage people is to think big about the opportunities that are available to you. I mean, I'm not really speaking specifically about this grant, but about a lot of stuff with urban forestry now, but this grant in particular, I mean, on what you apply for, you have $100,000 to $4 million. And I mean, I think even for Phoenix, like the grants they were applying to in the past were like $5-6 million. I mean, sorry, $5,000-6,000 for certain projects. So being able to think broad, big, like just think big as any project. That's kind of been our challenge here. So tree planting is a very important thing to our community, and why my role was created in the Office of Heat came directly from activists in our community, frankly, of which I used to be one, asking for this position for many, many years. We have a tree and shade master plan at the city of Phoenix that was adopted by council. So it's been 14 years now. One of the action items in the plan was to update that every 2 years. And it wasn't done. And so we're updating that now. And so besides having many millions of dollars of programmatic funding, we are also in the planning process to update the tree and shade plan for Phoenix. It was called the tree and shade plan before, but the word shade probably showed up like 6 times in this document. And it was mostly focused on trees. So we're kind of incorporating built shade into our planning as well. And then, yeah, so I guess the other kind of things I am having to I'll just chatter on for a while here about what we're doing, and then I'm happy to take some questions. So David, my boss, wanted me to generally advocate for, creating possibly an Office of Heat in your city, and then a tree strategist person in that Office of Heat, because there are so few offices of heat in the country, and some of those are just one person or just 2 people. Having an urban forestry strategist within an Office of Heat is, I don't think there's any other in the world. And so it's been very interesting to me how, coming from the world of sort of sustainable landscape architecture, working within a certain community for a long time, when you speak to people about shade and trees and the framework of heat, I just have found it, people just totally get it. They are on board. You don't even need to explain something. They just donate money. They write you checks. It's like actually very whiplashy for me having to advocate for this work for a long time. And people really they just really viscerally understand heat in a way that I don't know, I feel like different kind of like advocacy tax or tax of getting a better urban forest or a healthier urban forest for like aesthetics or raising your property values or even pollinators just like wasn't something people I don't know, maybe felt as strongly about. And so it's just been very, very successful. We've had a lot of great partnerships come to us, and it's just been really, it's been really great. So I think just like, and I also wrote on here that our bottleneck to getting the funding out the door is I don't know, like for us, if I have one staff person who helps with the grant, I mean, we could use like 5 and we could be doing the work like quicker and better with more depth, with working with better partners. I mean, I feel like we're very restricted with for the quantity of staff that we have and to be able to do this work. So with the Inflation Reduction Act, we applied for 30 million, we're getting 10. And we put in the application that we were going to hire 3 new people with 30 million, but we're keeping all 3 staff with the 10 million because over this 2 years in this job, it's just very apparent that staff is the key to working very deeply in community and like with equity, and it's slow work. You need to have the right partnerships with people. You need to have the time to answer the phone and listen to a community member talk to you for a half an hour at least about their needs and desires. And it's really, it just feels like to us, like staff is like where it's like that is what makes actually the trees in the ground and the mitigation work like done. And then I'll just say quickly, so we had so with our ARPA funding, because it is federal funding, it has more restrictions on it than private sector funding. We have very little funding that comes from the state, unlike probably California, but we have kind of like local like private sector funding, and we have federal funding. So the federal funding definitely was it's very challenging. But we set up 2 grants to get the funding out, and one was for schools and one was for neighborhood tree plantings. And we actually have a similar grant for shade structures in schools. And what we have found, I mean, my biggest takeaway to pass on to people is that the traditional grant process, or at least the way that the city was doing grants, which is having people pay for things, have them get reimbursed, even for schools, is very prohibitive, especially when we're talking about getting into communities that haven't normally received funding. There's just like a big they just have there's a lack of capacity, and then a lack of just like having cash, so with our neighborhood plantings, the city wanted us to, the traditional way the city did grants is that people would apply for grants, they would buy the trees with their own money and then get reimbursed. But we we knew that was going to make it so that people would not be able to apply for these grants. And so we went through the procurement process to get landscape contractors on board and wholesale nursery contracts with the city. And then we formed partnership with different NGOs. So we had everyone like all lined up, like that we could write everyone checks. And and so people apply for the grants, but they don't get any money. They don't get any funds. They get work. So we contract with the contractors. We partner with the NGOs to outreach into communities or do educational stuff. And for the school grant, where they would apply for funding, they would get they have to get quotes for like contractors and partner with NGOs for curriculum or for educational work. And it's very apparent that the schools that have good infrastructure, tons of capacity, are the ones who are able to apply for funding like that, and the school. And so we're kind of getting, so there's, we got the like low hanging fruit taken care of, and now we're trying to reach into the parts of town that frankly need this kind of work so badly, and they're telling us, like, I mean, we're giving away $70,000 per school and 250 per district, and we don't think our, like, it's really, I heard it in the application, I mean, in the presentation, that you want the applications to be simple, but sometimes there's just stuff you have to ask for in these grants, and so they're like, your grant applications are too confusing, they're just, we don't have the money, we don't have time to project manage, we don't even have time to call to contractors to get bids, we don't understand what it's like to walk the site, we don't, you're telling us we should put new irrigation systems in, but we just don't understand what that means. And so we are restructuring our grants to be more actually like the neighborhood grants, where we're just paying for trees to be planted with contractors. We're actually working right now to get a couple landscape architects under contract so they can help us with selecting sites and trees and all this stuff. So I mean, like, I feel like there's like the big picture, like start an office of heat, hire like the staff to work with the group, like identify the groups you want to work with. But then there's also like the very, very nitty gritty barriers to getting this work done, especially when it comes to equity, that like, it's really great to have to identify so you can like create the methodologies to get your money out the door. And all of this kind of like helps if you're to know before you apply for the grant. But obviously I would say apply for more money than you think you want. So anyways, that's those are kind of all the things on my list. I could keep talking, but I will pause to maybe answer some questions.
Awesome. We'll give folks some time to put questions in the Q&A function if you can. And meanwhile, I'll ask one or two questions. So, Lord, do you want to talk a little bit about high quality partnerships and what it takes to develop high quality partnerships, and how you found them to be important in your work? And then we'll go to a question from Shane next after that.
Yeah, good. Sorry, my office is like really noisy today, and so if you're hearing some background stuff, that's because so high quality partnerships, like I think that's really important. And in contrast to when I did work in California, we do not have the level of community groups that we need in Phoenix. Like we have need for groups on the ground to work. A lot of our NGOs some of them folded during COVID. And then we have a lot of groups that are very, very small. And like I said, so one of my goals is to capacity build with smaller groups. I think it's really important to identify the groups that you can work with that are on the ground. But for us, it's there's some really great moms group in Estrella Village, and they've gotten one grant from a local foundation for $2,000 to run a COVID testing truck during COVID, and now they want to do more, but they're just never done this kind of work before. And so that's why I'm saying having labor on your staff is helpful, because we are walking through groups, making spreadsheets in Spanish. It's that kind of work to get this work done. But I'm never gonna that's a part of town that the city has rarely worked in before. And so we've actually, and then I guess you kind of think I'm trying to think we reached that group through a county public health connection. It's really, I mean, I don't know if all of you work in government in big groups. I'm the one who's new to this, but it's it really is all about people. And like having the time to like attend other people's events, and like, you know, it took us a solid year to be able to like, and I mean, I've worked in community for a while here, but it took us a while to make the connections to get into these certain parts of town. We have really good council, so we've worked a lot with the council staff also.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That's one of the reasons that we created the small planning grant, was to allow an organization or a jurisdiction to hire someone to do that partnership development, potentially give out some of those very, very small mini grants to start those relationships and understand what kind of work could get done. Because there's a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of folks, they're not ready for a $10,000 grant, let alone like a $100,000 grant. And so there's ways that a local jurisdiction or a larger CBO can bring in those smaller organizations and groups into the fold over time. And we've tried to create the different grant types to allow for, graduating over time. So ideally, in round one, you get a small planning grant, you get some of these organizations on board, and then a few years later, you can in a future round have an implementation grant where those organizations are ready to do bigger projects and more things. I also think your advice on that there is a way to do these grant programs where you keep a lot more internally, and you have the contractors for trees, and you have the contractors for all the work that needs to get done, opposed to sort of making each individual organization implement that. I think I've definitely seen that in my implementation too, that relying on organizations to do things that they're not used to doing or not inherently good at, when you could have one contractor do 5 or 6 neighborhoods or school districts all at once. I really appreciate that advice. So before I go to Jody's questions in the Q&A, I want to take it over to Shane, who also has some Arizona ties.
Yeah, thanks, Braden, and thanks, Laura, for your comments. I spent 9 years in City Hall there in Phoenix before I came to California, so I went the other way. Since we're talking about implementation, I think today, I had kind of 2 questions. One was, Laura, for you, we're talking about all this tree planting activity, which is awesome and great. But what I recall in Phoenix was then you had to water the trees and continue to have bubbling landscape watering. So curious for you on how you're addressing that element of the implementation for watering the trees. And then maybe back to Braden or Allie about how you feel about that aspect as a component of a grant application. So thank you, Laura.
Yeah. And I think Phoenix is very similar to a lot of California in that we have to have supplemental irrigation in the city, even if you're doing a native tree, because like the city is just kind of a hard place for a tree, even a native tree. And I'm not a native tree only person, because I think the urban environment is not like a super, I like super natural place. So I'm open to other trees. We have a lot of really good arid adapted trees that can grow in Arizona. But that's where it comes back to like asking for lots of money. Like what we kind of, with our school grants, we're learning that they actually have more infrastructural need than we thought. I mean, we have these big, huge schools here. They're like huge campuses, no working irrigation, because it just hasn't been updated in 30, 40 years. And so I'm like, okay, if you need to spend 50, I don't know, this is part of like why we haven't actually even done a school planting yet, is because like maybe they need a $20,000 irrigation system. And as part of that, we get 10 trees out of it. Like trees are cheap. You can put trees in later with volunteers or, but so we've been kind of pushing a little bit harder on the infrastructural needs, which is when we started shifting into like needing professional help. Because these, in the past, we've been talking about tree planting grants, especially with schools, have been 15-gallon trees in the ground with volunteers on a weekend. And then the schools were just putting trees in where they had water and not where so then all their water around the campus wasn't working. And so they're putting them way out in the field where they had flood irrigation, which is something that I've never seen before Phoenix, but they have. But, and then the next layer on that would, so what we've also done is there is a really, really great water infrastructure group down in Tucson that is helping us work on getting GSI into these schools too, but you still have to supplementarily irrigate. They still need drip or bubblers on every tree. And so I can talk about this all day, but like people who kind of didn't really understand, I don't know who, but anyways, they were talking like, oh, it costs $125 to plant a tree. And I'm like, no, it costs, I mean, our streets department, if they have to just they have to put in a new tap off the main, they don't have to break up concrete. They're up to $800 a tree. And so we try to get people to think about $1,200 or $1,500 a tree when you're putting in irrigation, and that doesn't even maintenance. And I'm sure our labor costs here are less than in California. So if it helps to think per tree, like get that number up, because the infrastructural needs in our community are pretty vast. And I'm sure, especially in these areas of equity, who just have been very, very just haven't had any money for a long time. And yeah, hopefully that answered it a bit.
Yeah, that was great, Laura. And just Shane, to quickly answer your question, then we'll do a few of the questions in the Q&A and need to wrap up pretty soon here with Laura. We do have operations and maintenance as an eligible activity, so you can pay for O&M. The grant time cycles are 30-month grants, so in terms of the invoice structure, you can invoice us for that. We do have the ability for you to tell us, we believe that we want to do O&M beyond the 30 months. Can we work with you in the contract period to extend it out an extra additional 12 to 24 months? So we're trying to have as much of a O&M runway as we can in terms of being able to still take invoices for O&M, and we definitely understand the need for that. The state of California does have some existing urban greening programs and urban forestry programs. CAL FIRE runs a schools program, as well as an urban greening, CNRA runs an urban greening program, and they have some O&M built into their programs. We're really interested in any O&M innovations that folks have, and whether that's spending more money per tree and understanding what the potential impact of that is, whether that's doing workforce development with your either internal or externally contracted landscape maintenance folks to train on pruning and other maintenance practices, as well as working on the water side of things. I'm really appreciative. Laura mentioned the watershed management group out of Tucson. They really work hard to figure out how you bring in water from the streetscape, and so that you need less potable water and supplemental water for trees. That's certainly something that's an eligible activity in our program as well. So spending lots of money on the front, spending the appropriate amount of money to make big investments in the types of infrastructure you need for that tree to be successful, as well as spending money on the O&M side, are all to make sure we really have sustainable and long-lasting investments in the trees that we are putting in, really focusing on that quality side. I think the urban forestry movement has gone through those phases of million tree programs where there's just such almost a fetishization of the amount of trees instead of focusing on the quality of trees. And so I think that there's an opportunity to really focus on tree quality, in addition to understanding that we do need a lot of trees out there, but does every program need to focus on quantity over quality? So there's some really important and good discussions there. I wanted to get to Jody's questions in the chat quickly before we move on. Do you want to talk about some of the staffing that you have in Phoenix in terms of the work that the city is doing and sort of how much is contracted versus internal and some of those types of questions?
Yeah, so we have the Office of Heat, we have the director who doesn't, I mean, he's like, you know, he's our director. And then we have me, and I have one staff person, and then we're hiring 3 for IRA. And then and then we have, okay, so the City of Phoenix is weird. We have 12 different departments that manage space in Phoenix, frankly, 12 different ways: parks, streets, public works. Like, I could, yeah. Some of those people use contractors, and then parks, aviation have in-house staff. What we have definitely seen is the quality of work is significantly higher with in-house labor. You know, these people, we have with our urban forestry staff, we have 3 crews. I think they got approved another crew. You know, these people stick around for a long time. They get trained. Some of them have formal training in arboriculture. Some of them get trained on the job. And we have definitely found if a tree looks good, it's probably maintained by our in-house staff at the Parks Department. Most of the other departments use for-profit contractors, and they have the most success if we have like a person who's just eagle eye watching them, making sure they're doing the work right, making sure they're actually abiding to the actual contracts at the city. And then I will give, especially for urban forestry, I will give a big push for hiring a company that is specifically for urban forestry. So we just, my office just went through the procurement process and we are contracting with West Coast Arborists, which is it's specifically like a tree company rather than like the bigger companies. Like, I don't know, here it's Bright View. I think that's in parts of California too. Those are landscape maintenance companies, and they're not super knowledgeable about trees. They can do certain things, but they are going to do a lot of damage if you get the wrong people out there with no one watching them. At the right time of year, you can just, I mean, you can kill a tree here pretty quickly in Phoenix. So yeah, so I would say if you're going to contract, like if you can at all, I mean, I would love to share what like having gone through the procurement process, what we asked for in the contract. I would have changed a little bit for new landscape contractors.
Well, my goal would be that our county would have a county arborist. Our public works department doesn't have one. So that's why I was asking. And Braden, I can go quickly to my next question, which is actually a little bit of an advocacy piece. I find it very frustrating as a local government when I have to compete with all the other local governments. And I would prefer to see the granting entity, be it the state or the federal government, say, these are the types of projects we want, come and get them. And California did something like that in 2013 with energy efficiency for schools. And they said, here, if you do this is the menu of projects you need to do. And a little cottage industry developed of consultants who helped the schools go out and get the money from the California Energy Commission. And most of the money got spent. And at the time I was on a school board. And so because I happened to know about this, I was able to really help my district advocate. But as you were talking about your frustration with getting the money out to schools in particular, it occurred to me that might be a model you might think about. It sounds like you're kind of thinking in that direction anyhow, but tell the districts, like, this is what you need to do to get the money and let them come get it. It's really frustrating to put a lot of time into a grant application and then not get the money. And it's one of the frustrations I find. It's one of the reasons I might not pursue this particular grant opportunity, because I'm not sure how competitive the project I have in mind would be. And I don't know if I want to put that much time into writing a grant application that isn't going to get funded. It's really hard. So I know it's too late for OPR's grant this time around, but Braden, I'd love to talk with you more about different ways to structure the grant altogether. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jody, for that comment. And I think there are opportunities to think as we grow our extreme heat work over time, how we create more formula funding opportunities. Think about formula funding opportunities. Think about, different grant types that are more pre-packaged in the way that Lora is talking about. I think as our heat work matures, there's a real opportunity to fund things that way. I think for us, the heat work in California is rather new, and I think there's a real need to promote innovation and creativity and partnerships. And so that's why we designed the grant this way this first time out. But I agree with you. I was in your shoes for many, many years and lost a lot of grants that I spent a lot of time, lost out on grants I spent a lot of time writing. So I'm right there with you and feeling like there is a need to explore other options and look at things. But for this round, we've designed it this way, and this is what it'll look like. Lora, we have to transition. We'll allow for the second part of Grace's question, because it is a good one, and then allow you to say goodbye. So you want to talk a little bit more about sort of how you're thinking about efforts on private property and in residential, and where you see that movement piece of the work going?
Yeah, so I'll say this is a little bit where we're like so the city has really never had a significant program to support tree planting on private property. They would get like a couple $1,000 grants here and there and give it out to a neighborhood group that would do a tree planting in their neighborhood. So what we're doing, which is literally paying people to plant trees on private property, it is a lot. And where my office is we're very frank. Yeah, anyways, we're all figuring this out. I would say that we push really hard against the word no with lawyers and people who are used to doing things a certain way at the city. My office's informal motto is that we were not hired to fulfill the status quo. I mean, we were not hired, and this office was not created because things are going great in Phoenix for the heat. Our office was created to fix issues, to fix short-term issues, people literally dying out in the summer, and fix the long-term challenges to being able to live in a city this hot, which many other cities are starting to look as hot as Phoenix. Not as hot, but pretty hot. Yeah, we had lawyers tell us you can't plant in private property. We had this, we had that. We have Parks Department. People tell us they will not set 1 foot on private property to do any planting, which they have done before with other grants. And so we just that's why we hired landscape contractors, and we're just running the work ourselves. We make the lawyers work for us. They say no, and then I say, was that really a no? Like, what's the workaround for this? Is there something, and then, anyways, we got a good lawyer at the city. I got a good lawyer for our department, and he helps us think creatively about some of this issues too. But the private, we don't have everything sorted out. But we are paying for tree planting on private property, both, we're starting with single family residential. We're working through the complications with multifamily residential and commercial. And yeah, but I would say don't give up, because it's like 80% of our city is privately owned parcels around there. So that's the piece of the puzzle for Phoenix that really we need to work with to address our urban forest in the right places.
Awesome, Lora. We can't thank you enough for the generosity of your time, and continue to do amazing work in Phoenix. And thank you so much for getting us into the weeds on how you do your work and some of the tough decisions that have to get made. And you gave us good pointers as to how to overcome some of the barriers that a lot of us are going to see in doing this work. So good luck. I know you have some deadlines coming up in the next week or two, so good luck with the work, and thanks again for coming in. And then we also look forward to seeing some of your colleagues join us in future months. So really appreciate it. Awesome. So we are now going to dive into talking a little bit more about, you've now had an example of some of the realities of implementation and what they've been dealing with as they've been growing their extreme heat program, especially on the urban forestry implementation side in Phoenix. We're going to talk a little bit about implementation grants, do a little bit deeper dive than we did earlier, and then be open for questions as well. So next slide, Allie. So both types of grants can fund the same types of infrastructure and programmatic projects. Small implementation grants fund single sites or technology projects, so like a single technology like shade structures or water fountains or trees. Whereas an applicant and in small grants, applicants are not required to apply with a co-applicant, whereas in large grants, conversely, these fund projects that combine multiple types of infrastructure solutions or locations. Applicants should apply with co-applicants for these large grants. If it's not possible to apply with a co-applicant, you can submit a justification to explain how you will engage with communities. If you're a government and you're saying you can't have a co-applicant that's a CBO, then you can send us a justification. If you're a CBO and feel like you can't apply with a local government, then you can send us a justification. Now we'll get into the small implementation grants. So these range from $100,000 to $450,000 per award. There's a total of $3 million in this first round for these small implementation grants. Applicants are given the option to include partnership development as part of their funded grant activities. So you heard from Lora the importance of having partners, but that some of these types of partners that you might want to engage with, maybe they're like Lora talked about, there's a group of moms that have been working in a particular neighborhood, but they aren't a 501c3, they're just getting started. You know, those are the types of partnership development that you could do with a small implementation grant like this. And you can also, you can still have a co-applicant in these types of grants, and you can have a variety of different types of co-applicants, whether they be community-based organizations, governments, academic institutions, tribes. These projects are supposed to make sure that they're leading to extreme heat relief and demonstration of action. And these grants also can include they're supposed to be small scale infrastructure projects that don't need a lot of permitting or advanced planning. So if you need to do bigger planning for a larger implementation project, that's likely a large implementation grant. These grants are things that don't need big permits. They could be done, you know, within a 12 to 18 month timeline, and they're relatively easy to pull off from a project management perspective. That's really the type of project we're talking about with these small implementation grants. The large implementation grants, the next slide, these are ranging from $500,000 to $4 million per award. There's $9 million in this bucket, so it will be a competitive grant for these large implementation. It's preferred that you have a relevant co-applicant, and I'll go into a little bit more detail in the next slide about that. These are more comprehensive projects with multiple types of combined solutions. These projects may require more permitting and advanced planning than the small planning grants. So these are implementation projects that are larger type of projects. I will say the way that we design this program, you're not likely going to build something completely from scratch, even with a large implementation grant. This grant is really best designed for infrastructure projects that, if you're doing infrastructure, that are in, 15 or 30% design, and then you're able to add some shade structures or add cooling elements to an existing infrastructure project. If you're doing program implementation, then you don't necessarily need to have a program that you add to. This could be for brand new programs. But if for infrastructure, this is likely not like starting from scratch on a piece of infrastructure. It's adding to an infrastructure project that you're already working on, most likely. Next slide. So the preferred partnership structure for large implementation grants is follows. If the lead applicant is a community-based organization or coalition of community-based organizations, we would like for them to include a local public entity or tribal co-applicant. This ensures that the efforts funded can ultimately be implemented by and with local, regional, or tribal entities. If the lead applicant is a local or regional public entity or academic institution, the preference is that they will include a community-based organization as a co-applicant. This is to ensure that the project centers the needs of the most vulnerable communities and empowers community members to be involved in decision-making and is using is working with a CBO to help with that empowerment and with the centering of the needs of vulnerable communities. It's important to note that this requirement does not apply to tribal lead applicants. Instead of this partnership structure, tribal lead applicants can include any type of co-applicants, or they simply can conduct partnership development as a part of their funded grant activities. We made sure that our requirements done in this way do our best to respect tribal sovereignty with the understanding that tribes can operate efficiently, independently. We still require partnership development or a co-applicant because our enabling legislation requires that all funded projects include some type of multi-stakeholder partnership. So we're hoping to have multi-stakeholder partnership. We understand that everyone applying to this grant is going to be coming from different contexts and circumstances. So we've been trying to create some amount of flexibility, and we've been doing this particular flexibility for the tribes in the hope that it alleviates some of the burden of applying for grants for tribes. Next slide. While the preferred partnership structure is highly encouraged, we understand from our prior engagement that this is not possible for all applicants. So for example, some rural governments do not have any CBOs relevant to their area or in their region. In that case, CBOs may have trouble gaining full partnership support from a local government. So, or there's been historic tension between community groups and local government, or when a low capacity government cannot commit to serving as a co-applicant. So because of all of these dynamics and challenges that can come up, we do allow for a written justification, and that written justification needs to include what are your barriers to partnership, how will you meaningfully engage with the community throughout the project, and how do you plan to develop new partnerships if it's at all possible. And the way that Submittable works with the program that you apply for our program, you just answer a series of questions and we'll prompt you through that. As you answer each question a certain way, then it'll direct you how to fulfill answering all of the questions required for this written justification. So we also hope that you include the partnership work in your project work plan and in your budget. And additionally, the large implementation grant applications with a CBO lead applicant that doesn't have a local or regional public entity can propose, this is a little bit more complicated. So if a CBO is a lead applicant and they're proposing infrastructure, then we're hoping that they can get a letter of support from the local government or tribe or regional entity in which that infrastructure is taking place. And that's to ensure that those ideas really can be fully implemented if the CBO is a lead applicant. So as you can see, depending on who you are, there are these various issues that need to be worked out. So we do have a third-party TA provider that can help you think through some of these stickier issues, and we're also available to help you talk through these issues in case you do need to have an alternative partnership arrangement. Now I'll get to the next slide with the actual implementation grants. So we wanted to talk through a few of the types of implementation grants that you can have. So we've organized them based on the 4 tracks of the California statewide heat plan. You do not have to have a project that fits within any particular track, and you can actually mix project examples from different tracks into one project. And we're actually encouraging those types of mixing projects to take place. But we also want to give you examples of the types of activities that can take place in each grant. So, or in each type of grant. So we have building public awareness and notification. So track A can include neighborhood resilience events to make sure people are aware of extreme heat and the threats of extreme heat. They can include cool buddy programs to make sure people are partnering up to check on their neighbors. You can use arts and culture projects to build awareness for extreme heat. One example we have of this is the work, next slide, that has been happening out of the Office of Community Partnerships and Strategic Communications. They have 121 grantees across the state that are CBOs that have been working on delivering the Heat Ready California message and getting the word out about heat illnesses and how to prepare for extreme heat events. So there's opportunities to do this, your own versions of this type of work. What's been exciting to see about the grantees that have been working on Heat Ready already is that they've been putting the Heat Ready work into relevant languages for their communities. They've been working on different accessibility challenges to make sure that access need communities in their community have their needs met. There's been some cool examples of one Indigenous nonprofit that has been making coloring books and picture books about climate change and extreme heat, specifically tailored to their Indigenous residents. So there's a lot of ways to take that awareness building and make sure it's meeting the needs of your community. This state program in California has started that process, but there's certainly opportunities for you as a potential grantee of our program to expand who you're working with, what type of partners you're working with, how you're making sure you're meeting the messaging needs of your own community, and that's a really fruitful space to think about either standalone projects or adding some track A elements to an infrastructure project or to some other programming that you're proposing. Then we have track B, next slide. That's the community services and response aspect. So that could be creating packs to give out to targeted residents, whether that's people experiencing homelessness or heat survival packs for young people in schools, or for different target groups like outdoor workers or delivery workers. There's also opportunities to support basic first aid training, including heat training, different types of mutual aid programs, energy home savings toolkits, a lot of opportunities to make sure that immediate response needs are met through different types of campaigns and programs. One example we have of this, next slide, this is actually from the community I came from. A group of students at Arizona State University created a solar power mobile cooling trailer that could support the city's unhoused communities from dangerous summer temperatures. It has a shower, it has air conditioning and Wi-Fi, and the Homeless Services Department drives this trailer around to different quote unquote hot spots, different areas where there's an immediate need in a heat wave, where there's either an encampment or people that need some immediate heat relief. So instead of expecting people to show up to a standalone community resilience center or standalone cooling center, this gave an additional capacity to meet the needs, especially of people experiencing homelessness, in terms of providing different cooling amenities all in one source in a mobile way, opposed to a stationary way. So this was philanthropically funded and then carried out by the city, but designed by college students. Then we have 31, that's increasing the resilience of our built environment. So that can be actual physical infrastructure, shade structures, water fountains, splash pads, the employment of cool and smart surfaces, such as cool pavement or cool walls. Lots of opportunities there. It can also include thinking about transit shelters and different types of cool designs in terms of how the built environment is actually built, as well as different pilot projects of helping residential homes be more resilient to extreme heat, whether it's through fans or air conditioning solutions or other in-home cooling solutions. Track C. And then our example for Track C, City of San Antonio is installing cool pavements in sections across the city. They actually are doing 2 per council district. I believe they have 10 council districts. And so they're using 4 different companies. So they're testing out different products as they're doing this. They have the University of Texas, San Antonio as a partner to help do research on which of these technologies is working well as doing some community engagement to make sure people are understanding how this cool pavement is performing. We're actually going to have Doug Melnick, the sustainability director from the city of San Antonio, come and speak to us in a few weeks specifically about this work. So we're really excited to hear more about this work. But this pilot project that they've been doing, this is $1 million pilot project that they're doing in sites across the city, is one example of this type of built environment projects that you could use, could employ with our grant. Then there's Track D. This is utilizing nature-based solutions. So that can include tree plantings, tiny forests, cool community gardens, the green stormwater infrastructure projects like the ones that are happening in Phoenix and the implementation that we heard about in City of Tucson. It also can include nature-based playgrounds and shaded playgrounds, as well as cool ecosystems work. So whether that's creating a cool food forest or cool shaded streamway or taking ecosystems interventions that are helping cool specific locations. And as we described earlier after Shane's question, we can also fund the maintenance for those types of nature-based solutions as well. So one example of this that I've really enjoyed watching over the last several years is the rain catcher pilot program in the city of Austin. So it's a comprehensive effort to integrate the city's existing stormwater programs, and they've done this in a very geographically thoughtful way. So they've picked one sub watershed where they're doing multiple interventions in a watershed, including the first slide you saw was on residential property. They're also doing it on city property as well as school property. The pictures you're seeing here are some green stormwater capture as well as rain gardens and rain capture that are helping cool the campus. So this is an example where they've taken sort of a small geography and done a series of interventions to do cooling and responsible drought responsible vegetation throughout this one watershed. So it's a nice example about how this work can be done in a hyper local and coordinated way. Next slide. And then we have a combined example. So this is the Chelsea Cool Block project in Massachusetts. So I want to be clear here. All the projects we show you so far, while they focus on a solution from a particular track, they also can combine solutions from all 4 tracks to create comprehensive solutions. And we really want to encourage this. So this example from the city of Chelsea in the Boston area, they worked in collaboration with a nonprofit called Green Roots, the city of Boston, and Boston University. They're focusing on making one block at a time more cool through combined solutions across all of the tracks we've discussed. So in this example, they chose a block that contains multifamily housing. It contains community assets like a Boys and Girls Club. And let's talk a little bit about how it combines tracks. So They use some of our Track A elements by hosting multiple community engagement and volunteer events to bring the community together and educate them on the impacts of extreme heat. The nonprofit also facilitates a youth environmental justice group called Environmental Chelsea Organizers, which comprises of a team of 6 teens that are working on and informing projects that are important to them in the community. So that's a way of, they've now designed some particular interventions to do that community engagement work, even though they're putting in infrastructure. So that's really exciting to see those Track A elements working their way into an infrastructure project. They also have some Track B elements. So they're working on sustainable workforce development. The program is seeking funding so that low-income residents will be able to be paid to water the trees. And while it's not listed online, these residents could also be paid to provide community services during extreme heat events or host heat-safe activities at the Boys and Girls Club. So we're starting to see sort of actual programmatic work incorporated into the project, which is very much in Track B. And then in terms of Track C, the team is adding porous pavement throughout the block to reduce the reflectance of extreme heat. And they also plan to add reflective roofing to the Boys and Girls Club. So they do have an example nearby where a white roof on a city elementary school lowered the surface temperature by 20 degrees, and the surrounding air in that area dropped by 7 to 10 degrees in the summertime. So what an incredible example of a built environment solution that was incorporated into this effort. And then they also have Track D, so they're using nature-based solutions. They worked hard to add shade trees to this block. As of May 2022, they added 47 new elms, crabapples, cherries, and hawthorn trees. So an incredible example of all 4 tracks being represented in a single implementation project. And we're certainly excited to see what kind of combined implementation projects you come up with as well. So I'm going to pass it back on to Allie to do a brief review of our application process, and then we'll be available for some additional questions.
Thanks, Braden, and thanks for walking us through those examples. I know we're really low on time. There's so much great information to share, so hopefully it's been useful. I'm just going to speed right through this so we can at least take a couple questions. As far as our application process goes, our application opened on January 29th. Our request for technical assistance is due on March 5th. Our pre-application interest form and full application form is due April 23rd, and we'll make awards in the summer. Just to break it down quickly what that means for you all, the application process is as follows. First, you'll submit a pre-application interest form. We encourage you to do this as soon as possible. For those seeking application technical assistance, there's a priority due date for the pre-application interest form. So if you want TA, you need to submit the pre-application interest form by March 5th. Please note, our pre-application interest forms aren't scored. They're simply used as a point of contact with staff. We'll use it to provide any additional direction. And also, once you complete it, it's really important to note that then you will gain access to the full application form. We'll send it your way with a private link. All right, so the application review process, I'm not going to go over it today, but it includes eligibility checks, an interagency review panel, and for applicants for large planning grants and large implementation grants, it also includes a final interview or site visit if you're a top scoring applicant. As we've mentioned throughout, and if you couldn't already tell, we're really excited to be offering technical assistance for applicants during round 1. Please note that eligibility or priority is being given to applicants from funding target communities. Again, those are California Native American tribes and disadvantaged communities. And again, if you'd like to apply to receive application technical assistance, please submit your pre-application interest form by March 5th. I'll go ahead and put a link to that in the chat. And with that, I know we're super short on time, but hopefully we can at least take a couple questions. I'll pass it back to you, Braden.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Allie. If you have any additional questions about the program as you're thinking about potentially applying, feel free to put those in the Q&A function, and we're happy to get to a few before we wrap up today. And Jody, I do see your question in the chat. we can get you an email for the person over at the Office of Community Partnerships and Strategic Communications, who can give you the list of CBOs in your region. Allie, do you want to take this first question?
Sure, I was in another tab pulling up the link. Okay, the question is, in addition to Cal EPA, are there other mapping tools for heat vulnerability and social vulnerability, preferably by county, that you recommend we look at? Okay, so this is a really good question, and I will go ahead and try my best to clarify. So there's kind of two ways we can look at mapping tools. The first way is a really set mapping tool that we're providing, which is to define whether your community identifies as a disadvantaged community. So our disadvantaged community funding target is very strict. We're using the California Climate Investments definition. And with that, we provide two tools that folks can use to determine whether they're a disadvantaged community. We have the tool provided by California Climate Investments. And then we also made our own tool, a little ICARP tool that helps kind of break down some of the data that California Climate Investments created. So those are our two tools for determining whether you're a disadvantaged community. This is really different to us than kind of just talking generally about how your community might be vulnerable or resilient. And kind of in those more general narrative questions, you can take a lot more creative liberty in what tools you use. In our guidelines, we provide a pretty comprehensive list of some to get you started, but you can be pretty wide-reaching with those. But definitely recommend you check out the guidelines for some recommendations there. Braden, do you have anything to add on?
No, that's perfect.
Great.
Yes, so an inventory is an example of a study that could be done as part of a broader planning project. So like you imply in your grant program or in your question, you know, I think an application would want to see an inventory done in a way that is setting up implementation. And is thinking really about the strategy that you're going to be using to improve your tree coverage and your tree opportunity. I do think that there have been some really interesting innovations in thinking about tree equity, and so there are opportunities to really look at doing an equity analysis as a part of your tree inventory program. There's opportunities to fold in workforce development. There's opportunities to fold in neighborhood engagement around trees and education around trees. So I think an inventory is definitely one piece of a puzzle, but the inventory itself is definitely an eligible activity.
Yeah, and just to clarify for those that might not be following along in the Q&A, this question was, would an inventory collection via inventory program or viable tree planting location be considered a planning or implementation activity? We would also like to include planting and several other activities within our program, but we can't begin until these locations are identified. And just one thing to add on to Braden's point, which was really helpful, it might be useful for you to know that for planning grants, large planning grants, we're allowing 25% of the planning grant budget to be used on small scale implementation projects to provide proof of concept for your proposed investment. So if you're completing a planning grant, but you have some implementation that you'd like to include, up to 25% of your project budget can go towards those demonstration projects.
Excellent. So I could see a world in which you've done a citywide tree inventory. You now want to figure out specifically where to put trees. So you partner with different CBOs in an area to do that. And then you come up with a plan with where trees go that has happened in a really informed way. And as Ali said, you then have money available to actually put some trees in the ground that are a direct response of the engagement you've been doing. One of the things that I've found as a practitioner is planning's great, but people want to see trees in the ground, or people want to see progress. So that's why we made sure that you had the ability to do some level of implementation even in a planning grant, so that you can so that folks that you're working with can see some immediate things happen. So we do need to wrap up here shortly. If there's one more question, you can raise your hand. Tracy stole it. So here, I'll read the question, then Allie, you may want to answer it. If you're not located in a DAC community, but your program would function as a cooling center destination or provide capacity enhancements so that more people in a DAC could utilize your park or beach, is this possible? Or if your comprehensive program contains elements in a DAC community and part of this would allow for traveling to a cool region, is this possible?
Cool. Yeah, I think I would need to know a little more about your project to tell you one way or another. And I wouldn't want to say definitively if you would qualify or not as a DAC. And I see it's a complicated description. But what I can share with you is the two ways that we're allowing DACs to be qualified is by your jurisdiction or your impact area. And I think this might provide some of the flexibility you're looking for. So what jurisdiction versus impact area means is if you are, let's say, the city of Albuquerque in New Mexico, and you're completing the city of Albuquerque heat action plan, that's pretty straightforward. Your DAC area would be your jurisdiction, the city of Albuquerque. However, you have another option if your project doesn't really fall within jurisdictional boundaries. And by that, you can provide an impact area. So rather than saying your exact jurisdictional boundaries, you can explain to us which census tracts or which areas your project will impact most directly, even if it doesn't fall within a traditional boundary. That being said, you will need to provide a justification of why you chose that impact area, and it needs to be fairly clear why you're choosing the areas you are. I'm not totally sure if that applies to what you're describing, but I hope it was helpful. And I see that it helps. That's great.
So there will be an opportunity on the day that the pre-apps are due. If you have additional questions or concerns that you want to follow up with us on. And we will be having these weekly sessions where we can answer questions. We can't really discuss, the details of projects in terms of helping you prioritize projects, but you can ask us questions that might be able to help with your prioritization of projects. So that's from an anonymous participant who asked about that. So with that, we need to transition. We are having future workshops. We are so excited. Next week at 1 p.m., February 28th, we will have Aaron Garnas Holmes from the city of Washington, D.C., discuss their Keep DC Cool plan. So this is really an example of a large planning grant. Aaron actually came to the city right after the plan, or right when the plan was being adopted, and then he's been in charge of implementation. So he'll be able to talk to you both about the plan itself as well as lessons learned from implementing the plan. It's one of the best national examples of a comprehensive cooling plan. So really excited to hear from Aaron. And then we also have some other workshops coming up. So next slide. We will have a general overview and a support for your technical support for your intent to apply forms, since they're due later that day on the 5th. So anyone that has questions or wants anything resolved before they have to submit their letter or notice to intent form can come to a basic general workshop on March 5th. Next slide. We have the city of San Antonio, Doug Melnick, coming to talk about their all-of-government approach to extreme heat, as well as their cool pavement pilot project. So that'll be on March 13th. Next slide. On the 21st, we'll have the city of Phoenix come back. Next time, they'll be talking about heat relief and response and some of their immediate relief efforts they've been conducting. We also hopefully will have a local nonprofit that has been working on heat response and mitigation come to that as well to share about a local CBO's efforts. Next slide. Then on the 27th, we will have a presentation about the Green Stormwater Infrastructure Master Plan from Lake Havasu City, and we may have a special guest to talk about green stormwater infrastructure and nature-based solutions from the city of Boulder as well. So this will be Nature-Based Solutions Day on March 27th. And then we will have another City of Phoenix Day where they'll be talking about their built environment and structural shade efforts for those of you that are interested in that infrastructure track C type of work. Allie, I'll hand it to you for the feedback form.
Great, thanks so much, Braden. So we really hope you enjoyed our presentation today, but we want to make sure that we're on the right track in providing what's useful to you. This space is yours and we're just trying to help out. So with that in mind, we'd love if you could tell us how we're doing. You can scan the QR code or use the link in the chat to provide feedback on both our workshops, the application process in general. You can use the feedback form to tell us about our application forms, and we'll use all of this feedback to improve our program. We'll do what we can this round, and we'll definitely incorporate for future rounds. I know that we used a different workshop format today where we got to less questions, so we'd love to hear if this is useful for you or if you'd like something else in the future. Just let us know. Do note that if you have any specific questions regarding your application, this is not really the place. This is more general feedback on the application process. So if you have specific questions about your application, go ahead and email icarp.grants@opr.ca.gov and we'll get your specific application questions answered. And with that, we know we're 1 minute over time, so we appreciate those of you who have stuck around. Again, my name's Allie. I'm the assistant planner. Braden's the manager. We're so grateful for you all for joining. If you haven't already, please sign up for our listserv so you can stay in touch. And along with the icarp.grants@opr.ca.gov email, you can reach both of our emails separately on the slide. Unfortunately, we have to close out the room right after the session because we want everyone to hear all the answers. But again, we appreciate you all so much for coming and we hope to see you at a future workshop.